right, fantastic. Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks so much. Well, kia ora, good afternoon, good evening to all of you in Canada, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you wherever you are tuning in from across the globe. I am in Perth, Western Australia at the moment, so it is 6 a.m. tomorrow morning here, which is just mind-blowing when you think about it. But thank you so much for having me along. Welcome to Agenting, Automating, and Copiloting. Who really gives a shift about all of this change? So, before I kick off, I just want to give a huge shout out and thank you to all of the event organizers and sponsors. It takes an enormous amount of work to put on an event like this, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and share my passion. So, thank you to all of the organizers and the sponsors. All right, well, let's crack into it. In 1986, something unimaginable happened in the world of music. Now, I realize that this might be before some of you were born, which is starting to make me feel weird because I just turned 46 and I'm starting to get into that position where I'm older than other people in the room, which is weird and new for me. But in 1986, Aerosmith and Run DMC collaborated on a track. Now, this is something that had never ever happened before, but they recorded a track called Walk This Way. And for the first time ever in the history of popular music, hip hop and rock and roll were combined in the same song. Now, prior to this, these were different worlds, different artists, different audiences, and yet they came together and collaborated in something that became absolutely iconic. And the man behind it was this guy. His name is Rick Rubin. You might have heard of him. He's kind of a big deal in the music world. He's produced many of the artists and the hits that you've loved throughout your life. And he had this crazy idea. He said, I love Run DMC and I love Aerosmith. What if we put them together? And the result was an instant classic. You see, despite the fact that this was something that had never been done before, it had some incredible results. To start with, an icon was created. Whether or not you like rock and roll, whether or not you like hip hop, I guarantee that you have heard this song because it is that famous. It was commercially successful. It was a top hit on the music charts. And more importantly, hip hop hit the mainstream. It is today the top streaming genre on Spotify. And Walk This Way was a critical part in expanding the audience of hip hop beyond the inner core, the inner urban core of many of the cities in North America to a much wider audience globally. It pulled Aerosmith out of a career slump, and it paved the way for artists like Eminem and Linkin Park to create a similar style of music. Those of us who might be a bit younger might be thinking, what's the big deal? Rock and roll and hip hop combined. It had never been done before this, and it was thanks to this song that we have this style of music and these artists. Now, you're sitting there thinking, Nathan, that is absolutely fascinating. What on earth does this have to do with AI? You've got about 20 seconds before I get back to my busy day. Well, there's three things I want you to take away from our session. And the slide has gone missing. But sometimes the best things in life are when we combine unusual things. So, as I said, I'm Nathan Rose. I am a functional architect at HSO. I'm based in Auckland, New Zealand. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in business applications. As my fellow MVP Mary Myers is fond of saying, how do you know someone's an MVP? Don't worry, we'll tell you. And my mission is to unleash human creativity via AI, low code, and increasingly natural language. Now, a quick overview of how we're going to spend our time together today. We're going to take a quick look at how we got here, brief history of the present. We're then going to see how agents differ from traditional automation. I think we all suspect there's something different I'm going to delve into exactly what that is, and we're going to explore a new paradigm for agents and automation working together. I'll get into a hands-on demo and I'll show you some agents working with automation in the Power Platform, and we'll wrap up with Q&A. Now, I love for these sessions to be as interactive as possible. So if at any point in time you have a question, a comment, something you don't understand, something you don't agree with, feel free to come off mute and ask. Alternatively, if you'd rather pop your comment in the chat, that's cool too. I don't have ready access to it while I'm presenting. I'm on a 14-inch laptop screen today. So if someone can just come off mute and let me know that there's a comment that I need to address, that would be awesome. All right, let's get into it. How did we get here? Well, for most of human history, from the dawn of time until the Industrial Revolution, automation was manual. We used manual tools. We used animals and people to power the rudimentary machines that we had, but productivity gains stopped with the invention of the wheel. Life was an endless slog of working really hard to produce enough food so you could live another day to work really hard to produce enough food. Fun times. Then, at the end of the 1700s, we discovered how to harness steam and coal and recycled dinosaurs to power our machines, and we entered the electromechanical age of automation. This is the Industrial Revolution. And as a result, we could produce the abundance that you and I enjoy today. We were able to produce far more than we could ever possibly consume. We also didn't need as many people in factories to power these machines or working on farms. And so we started to make the shift from farm to factory and increasingly into the office because we needed clerical and administrative work, but we had machines that were powered by steam, coal, petrochemicals to do the actual doing and the work. And so that was the Industrial Revolution. That lasted until the 1900s. And then in the 1950s, as I mentioned, we had created the knowledge worker. This is the world you and I inhabit. We had clerical and administrative and managerial tasks that needed to be done. And by the mid-1950s, computers were starting to make their way into the workplace. And we entered this era of programmable automation. We could program the machines to do things for us. They would take inputs, they would do stuff and produce outputs. This is our world. If you're a Power Platform professional, you know this very well. This started with punch cards, it culminated with Power Automate. Then, sometime in the last decade or so, we got AI and digital automation. This is stuff like AI Builder and OCR, where we take images or documents and we can extract parameters from them and then run it through traditional automation. This is what Donna Sarkar at Microsoft would refer to as sparkling automation. And then in 2022, we got generative AI. And in the last year or so, this has started to become known as autonomous agents, where agents can start to do things independently. Now, this used to be relatively simple in a Power Platform Microsoft 365 point of view because AI answered questions and automation did stuff. Now, I'm grossly oversimplifying here, but you get the idea. You would chat to Copilot to get answers to your questions, maybe compose an email, and when you actually needed to do something, you would use a tool like Power Automate. And life was great. And then, just before Christmas last year, Satya Nadella sat down for that now infamous interview where he dropped to the mic and declared that SaaS as we know it is dead. Why? Because agents can do stuff. Now, I don't know about you, but I found myself perplexed in a bit of a quandary. And that's not an accurate representation of me thinking about it. But on the one hand, we've got automation as we've known it, Power Automate, logic apps, function apps, things like this. It has automated tasks for a long time. It's done it very well. And now we're being told that we have autonomous agents. And these also do stuff. And so what's the difference? How is it different? Well, let's explore. All right, I said there's three things that I wanted you to take away. This is the second. The first is that when, unfortunately, the slide disappeared from my deck. But the first big thing is that sometimes the best results come from combining unusual things like putting hip hop and rock and roll together. This is the second key takeaway. Automation, as we've known it, is like classical music, and agents are rock and roll, and not just because they sometimes hallucinate. All right. Let's break it down. What's the difference between an autonomous agent and automation? Well, automation and agents, again, they both do stuff, but let's look at how they do it. Automation, as we've known it, is rule-based. It has an explicit set of instructions that it follows. It does the same thing every time. It's deterministic. We know what we're going to get before we ever even build that automation. We know that we need a number, and so everything we've built into that is going to produce a number. It's never going to produce a string or a paragraph or anything like that. It's precise. It's going to give us, again, the same thing every time because it's deterministic and it follows an explicit set of rules. It's static. Automation doesn't change unless someone like you or I gets under the hood and starts to make changes. And it's non-adaptive. That's done by someone like you or me who reviews the run logs and then determines how we can improve it. So that's the world of automation as we've known it. But what about agents? How are they different? Agents aren't rule-based, they're goal-based. So instead of being given an explicit set of rules to follow, an agent is given a job description. Your job is to answer questions and reply to emails, something like that. They're given context. So again, instead of this explicit set of rules, they're given access to context and knowledge. So you're part of the customer service team. You answer questions based on returns. Your knowledge is our return policy, and that's what they're doing. They handle uncertainty. Uncertainty in the world of automation leads to errors and failure. In the world of agents, they are explicitly set up for this. When we have an autonomous agent, we don't know exactly what it's going to be asked to handle. We just know that it's going to be asked to answer questions based on the context and goals that we've put around it. And it's adaptive. Agents are built from the ground up to be self-improving and self-learning over time. The more they run, the better they get. All right, so that's the broad strokes about automation and agents. Let's get a little more specific about what's going on here. And in order to do that, we need to take a trip back to math class when you were about 12 years old. Believe it or not, your math teacher prepared you for the world of agentic AI before any of this was ever invented. So, do you remember you had two different types of homework problems? The first type, you'd have a combination of numbers and symbols, and you had to perform the operations that those symbols expressed. So, add, subtract, divide, etc. That was the first type. Then you had the other type of homework problem. Do you remember this? The dreaded word problem. You'd have to read a paragraph and then based on that paragraph, work out what math problem you were actually being asked to solve. Well, guess what an autonomous agent is doing? It's doing this exact same thing. Let's pull this apart. So We've got our problem. Sarah's baking cookies for a school fundraiser. She needs 3.5 cups of flour to make a single batch. So how many cups of flour does she need to make 4 batches of cookies? All right, well, let's look at this the way an agent would look at it. We know that we need 3.5 cups of flour for a single batch of cookies. It doesn't matter that it's for a school fundraiser. We know that we want to make 4 batches of cookies. And so how many cups of flour do we need in total? All right, let's start pulling this stuff out. 3.5, 4. We think we need to multiply. And we ultimately think our problem is 3.5 times 4. That's the problem that we're being asked to solve. Well, guess what all of this stuff is? 3.5 is a parameter. So is 4. Multiplication is a process. And 3.5 times 4 is the decision that we made about how to combine the parameters and run them through the process to solve the problem. And so you've performed the work of an agent. But let's look at this through another lens. So again, we've got our problem. And when we put on our agent hat, how do we read this? Well, we're goal-oriented. We know that we need to read this to solve a math problem. We're not reading it to correct grammar. We're not reading it to summarize. We're simply reading it to solve the math problem that's being asked to be solved in the problem. Context aware. This is math. That's all we care about. That's our knowledge. Handles uncertainty. We don't know what we're going to be asked to solve when we read it. We might be subtracting or adding. In this case, we're multiplying, but we don't know exactly what we're going to be asked. But we know that our goal is to use our knowledge of math to look for the math problem and solve it. And adaptive. The more of these you got, the more of these you did, the better at it you got over time. And so you put on your agent hat. Then, as we start extracting our parameters and our process and making decisions about how to combine them, well, now we can take our agent hat off and put on our automation hat, because multiplication is rule-based. It works the same way every single time. It's deterministic. Multiplication will always, always, always produce a number. It's not going to produce a paragraph. It's not going to produce any other type of data than a number. It's static. This problem that we've determined needs to be solved is not going to change unless we reread the math problem and determine that there's something else they're asking for. Now, our analogy breaks down at non-adaptive because, again, the more of these you did, the better you got at it, but all analogies break down at some point. But you shifted gears from agent to automation. As an agent, you read it to figure out what needed to happen, and then in automation mode, you simply ran the problem that they were asking you to solve. And so this brings us to our new paradigm for automation and agents working together. This is the third thing I want you to take away from today's session. When we already know what to do, this is the world of traditional automation. Things like Power Automate. But when we need to decide what to do, this is the world of agentic automation. They both do stuff, but they're doing fundamentally different things in different ways. So when you need to decide what to do, use an agent. And once you've already made that decision, then hand off to automation as we've traditionally used it. All right, well, let's pop out of the slides and let's get hands-on with the demo. So what I'm going to take you through is a few scenarios. Firstly, I'm going to show you an autonomous agent that's working in Dynamics 365 customer service to respond and route emails based on incoming incoming emails. This will be a government type scenario. And then we'll shift over to Customer Insights Journeys, and we'll see how an autonomous agent can help handle incoming messages, SMS or WhatsApp replies. Now, these both come from real life scenarios that I've encountered with customers over the last few months. So let me pop out of the slides and let's get into the demo. Okay, here we are in Copilot Studio. So the first thing we're going to go through is this citizen query agent. Now this comes from a real life scenario that I encountered with a government customer. So they would get a lot of cases into their help desk, and not all of them needed to be dealt with. Some of them could be answered from an FAQ. Some of them needed to create a case, and some of them simply was just someone having a bad day and complaining. And so it required an empathetic response, but it didn't really require a human to look at it. And so I've built this agent to do that very thing. So when you create your agents in Copilot Studio, you're going to give it a description and instructions. And so these are the instructions and description for my agent. Now, when you're working with these, you really want to think language, 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 because that's what's powering this. That's what the LLM needs in order to do its job. And so the more text you can give it about who it is and what it's meant to do, the better results you're going to get. And so I've told it here that you're an autonomous agent, you monitor incoming emails, and your job is to assess the email, work out what you're meant to do, and then provide a response, create a case, or I've called it a standard response. If you can't answer the question, somebody just needs an empathetic response. And so I've given it its tasks. This is what you're meant to do. So it's a little different than automation because it's got a bit more leeway in terms of doing its job. Now, if we come down here, this is knowledge. So I've created an FAQ document. Let me open that up here. So this is the FAQ. So I've created this for a fictitious parks, leisure, and recreational government department. And so it's got information about that here in its knowledge. That's its knowledge. And then it's got tools. These are things that it can do. And we'll get into that in a second. And then it's got its trigger. And so it's triggered by emails coming into a mailbox with a specific subject. So if you're used to working with Power Automate, this works exactly the same way. Now, this is a new feature down here I've not played with where it can be used to call other agents, but this is where this starts to get super powerful and letting you have teams of agents. But we'll come back to our tools here. This is where the agent does stuff. And so, for example, we can send a response based on the FAQ. And so again, you're going to need, when you're filling these out, you'll need to put in the name and the description. If you're used to working in Power Automate, you might be used to just leaving these blank or whatever the out of the box generic name or description is. For an agent, you need to put this description in so that it knows what to do with it. But if we come down here, I've said just dynamically fill in who that email goes to, the subject and the body, and the LLM just figures that out for me. Now I can specify as well if we come down to one of my other actions here, working with Dataverse, I can specify, in this case, I want you to work in this environment, and I want you to work with this table, but the rest of it, I'll let you figure out what you need to do. And so this is how the agent can start to call on more traditional automation types of tools to do stuff. Once it determines something needs to be done, it can then hand off. Now these are synchronous and they do the doing. So let's go ahead and test this. Now I've got some pre-canned emails that I've sent in. So I'm going to go over here to the mailbox and we'll go through three scenarios. First one is we're simply going to ask about what types of facilities are available. This is going to come from our FAQ. The next is someone's just venting. They've had a bad day. They've sent in an email about something they're not happy about. We can't really answer it from the FAQ. It doesn't really require a case. It just requires an empathetic response. But we don't actually need a person to do this because the agent can take care of that for us. And then lastly, we've got one where we need to create a case. We want to report a hazard. So let's pop in back to our agent, and we're going to come down here to our triggers and click our test beaker, and we'll see this running. So we'll go through our first scenario where someone just has a question from the FAQ. And what should happen is we should get an email with an answer to the FAQ. So you can see over here, it's thinking, it's searching its knowledge sources, and it's answered this. Now, I'm going to have to run this again because it didn't send us an email. It sometimes does this, so let's try this one more time. And this time we should see it produce an email. So it's searching its knowledge. And it looks like I have not prayed hard enough to the demo gods today. But all right, let's move on. So we'll move on to our next scenario where someone has sent in an email. They're having a bad day, and we need to send an empathetic response. So I'm going to click over here on this one. This is our second email that came in, just complaining about the wait, and so we'll click start testing. And so the agent's reading this email. It's determining what needs to happen. And all right, sorry guys, demo is looks like it's creating a case for us. So let's take a quick look. Take a quick look at this. All right, so it's created a case based on broken tiles. I might have gotten the wrong trigger. Let's just take a quick look. So this is the case that the agent's created. It's linked it to the customer based on who sent the email in. And okay, so all right, I must have gotten it in the wrong order. Okay, so this is the email that went in. This was the trigger that it got. And so it's determined based on this that it needs to create a case. And so what it did was it searched for the contact and then used that contact to create a case. If it was a contact that wasn't in the system, it would have created a contact and then created the case. So the agents reasoned over it and determined that a case needs to be created. All right, let's see if we can get third time lucky. And this should be the one that I expected, which is having to wait 15 minutes in line and being cold and unhappy. So let's cross our fingers and toes and see if the demo gods give me an easy one. All right. Try this one more time. All right. Let me See if I can find another one. It seems to be creating cases. There we go. Okay. So we've triggered the send a standard reply. Now, if I come here to my mailbox, I should have, here we go. All right. So I've got some responses from the agent. So you can see that it has sent an empathetic response to me based on that email. So apologizing for the inconvenience, understanding that it's frustrating, we're looking into the matter. And so you can see that the agent was able to send a response based on the email that I sent in, and it didn't require a human in the loop necessarily in order to respond to this customer. Now, when I gave this demo about a month ago, it was doing things. I sent an email saying that I was really frustrated, and it responded literally with, "I'm sorry you're frustrated." And so it was kind of funny, but it's also a great teachable moment because you you probably need a human intercepting these things to start with just to see what is the agent coming up with? Are we happy with this before we put it in front of customers? But you can see that, so we got similar response, but it's also learning. And so it hasn't done that again. So that's our first scenario where we can use an autonomous agent to answer questions based on knowledge and either create cases, send responses based on its knowledge, or just send a generic response because it doesn't really have anything it can help with, but it's also not something that a human could really help with either. And so you can see how these can start to save time and effort and make things a bit more productive for your team, and how they're doing things that traditional automation can't really do. All right, let's move on to our second demo. And we're going to be looking at customer insights journeys. And this is an agent that didn't load properly. Let's try this again. Okay, here we go. So this is an agent that I created based on another customer scenario that I came across earlier this year. So when you're working with customer insights journeys and you install a custom channel, so we installed one to send SMS because in New Zealand, something government, we can't use Twilio. We had to use a custom SMS channel. The downside was we couldn't use the out-of-the-box SMS keyword functionality that comes with customer insights journeys. So if somebody replies yes, somebody replies no, you can automate things, but we couldn't do that because it's not supported with a custom channel. But we were able to do that with Power Automate. The downside was that the customer's business logic was anything that's not a yes is a no, which sounds really simple. If the customer replies yes, notify a salesperson. If they reply no, take them off the mailing list. But we were receiving unstructured data. It's an SMS message. And so there's lots of different ways to say no because English is a gloriously inspecific language. Someone could say no, they could say no full stop, no comma. It could be in caps or lowercase. It could say no thank you or not today, something like that. Or it could be something ambiguous like I'm not really interested today, but maybe next week, something like that. And if we tried to account for every single permutation of no in our automation, we're going to break all of the rules of good solution architecture because it's either going to be the most unwieldy switch condition in the history of planet Earth, or or we're going to have so many child flows that this is going to be absolutely impossible to keep track of. And so I proposed an autonomous agent. Now, the client ultimately didn't go for it. They're a bit AI phobic, but I built it for myself anyways because it seemed like a good use case. And so this is the WhatsApp monitor. And what it does is it intercepts messages coming in to determine the customer's intent. What do they want to do? Do they want more information? Are they interested? Or do they want to be taken off the list? And again, because agents understand language, they really excel with language, this is a great use case. This actually simplifies your automations because instead of having to have all these different bits of your automation for to accommodate all these different ways someone can say no, you simply have a single agent that whose job it is to work out, does this person mean yes or no? So again, it's got its description. You're an autonomous agent. You monitor to understand intent. And then we come down to the general instructions, and this is its job. Job is to look at the WhatsApp message and determine the intent. I've said this may have an ambiguous or double meaning, and so you need to use reasoning to understand this. And so sometimes it takes a little longer, but the reasoning is a powerful feature that lets this start to look at it a bit more like a human would. And then if you've determined that this has positive, then create a task so the salesperson is notified. Or if you think that the intent is negative, then find the contact and update it to remove their consent preferences so they don't get emails or text messages, WhatsApp messages in the future. So that's what the agent is doing. These are the tools that it's hooked up to. So it can create a task in Dataverse, or it's going to find the contact and update the contact based on its consent preferences. So that's what it's going to do. It's fairly simple. Now, the only knowledge I've hooked this up to is its general knowledge, the LLM itself. Down here to knowledge, it's just using the LLM because all I care about is just, do you think this person is saying yes or no? It doesn't need any domain specific knowledge to our company. So let's go ahead and run some tests. I'm going to come here to Power Automate. Now I'm faking this a bit. So I've created a Cloudflow to create what I'm calling a fake WhatsApp message because working with their API was just a little too challenging. So let's go ahead and run this. And let's put in our first one. Let's go down the positive path. I'm interested. Please send more information. Need to put a number in here. And let's run our flow. So this is going to create our WhatsApp message. And now if I come over here to my agent, and come to my triggers, let's go ahead and test the agent. So it's going to reason over this. And it's determined that we need to create a task because this has a positive intent. So let's come over to Customer Insights Journeys. And let's go to my contact. Sorry, we need to go to Activities. And you can see that we have an activity that's just been created by the agent. The agent determined that we needed to create the task, and so it's done it. Now you can put more details in here. I was in a bit of a hurry when I built this, so we're just creating the task, but you get the idea of what's possible. All right, let's go down the unhappy path. Let's say that I'm not interested. So I'm going to come to my contact record here just to show you what it's going to do. And so here on the details, this bulk email, the agent is going to flick this to do not allow if it determines that the intent is negative. So let's go ahead and give it some negative intent. Come back here and we'll run our flow. All right, we've created our fake WhatsApp message. Let's come back to our agent. And let's test the trigger. Okay, let me just a second here. Sorry, guys. Not my morning today in the demo department. All right, let's try this one more time. All right, so it's looking for a contact, and it's updated the contact. So we've told it when you determine that it's negative, find the contact and then update it. So let's come back to Customer Insights Journeys. And remember, this is set to allow. So let's do a quick refresh. And you can see that the agent has updated this to do not allow. So the agent determined the intent was negative, and so it's updated this so they're not going to get messages in the future. All right, let's change that back. And let's run a third scenario. We're going to run this one here. So we'll give it some kind of ambiguous language. I'm not interested today, but I might be next week. Call me then. Let's see what the agent does. Let's click run. We'll put in our message. Run it. All right, we've created our WhatsApp message. Let's come up here and let's test our trigger. Let's see what it decides to do. It's reasoning over it. All right, it looks like it has created a task. Now, we'll check. I've seen it do some interesting things. I've seen it determine that it's both positive and negative. So let's take a look and see. Pop back into Insights Journeys. So firstly, so this is set to allow. Let's just do a quick refresh just to make sure that it hasn't done both. Ooh, look at that. That's interesting. It's determined negative intent. Now, if I come over to activities, oh, hang on, activities, let's just do a quick refresh. You can see that it's also created a task. Potential interest next week. So the agent interpreted it both ways. Now, this is an area where I would say we need to get into the instructions of the agent and give it more detail and say, hey, if you've determined that it's both, you need to pick one or the other. Or if you are 51% sure it's positive versus 49% negative, something like that. It's something that we'll need to experiment with and play with. But you can see how it is interpreting language and it is doing stuff. But as it is still early days, this is going to be an iterative process of giving the agent instructions, telling it, observing what it does, and then telling it what you want it to do versus what you don't want it to do. So, so you can start to see how this can save you some time and complexity in your automation by interpreting language. But again, we need to increasingly give it detailed instructions. And so I fully expect that these agent instructions will be like a living document, something that is iterative and evolving over time. All right, so that's the demo. I've shown you how the agent can respond to FAQ questions from its knowledge, how it can create cases if it determines that needs to happen. how it can just send a basic reply if it determines I don't need to create a case and a human doesn't really need to look at this. It can just send an empathetic response, and how it can route things based on intent. And so if it determines positive or negative intent, and some of the areas that we need to look at and be careful with. So in with our most recent example where it did both, which is really not what we want to happen, but stuff that we need to be thinking about as we're working with these. So let's pop back into the presentation and let's wrap things up. All right, so we've seen both of these scenarios with the autonomous agent. And so it brings us to the end of our time together. So we've seen the relative strengths of generative AI and traditional automation. That generative AI is really good for determining what needs to happen, things like intent, things like what is this person really asking me? And then handing off to, to automation as we've known it. And so we see how, like when Run DMC and Aerosmith came together to record Walk This Way, an unlikely pairing of taking generative AI and automation expands what's possible. Things that were previously required a human or were just in the too hard or too expensive basket to automate, we can bring agents in to help simplify the process and let us leverage the respective strengths of both. So thank you all so much for your time and your attention, and I'm happy to open it up to questions.